Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Now, if you think Bram Stoker's Dracula is just, a simple, spooky story about fangs, bats, and foggy London streets, well, you are definitely in for a surprise today. We're going to peel back those gothic layers to reveal what was actually terrifying Victorian readers. So let's just dive right into it.
I want to kick things off by asking you the exact same question that author LindaAnn LoSchiavo poses in her brilliant essay on the subject. What scares us more? Bloodthirsty vampires, or the collapse of everything we thought we knew about men and women? You see, the real terror lurking beneath the surface of this classic novel, it isn't the undead. It's actually the unraveling of Victorian society's most cherished, rigid categories. I mean, they were literally watching the clear lines between male and female, pure and fallen, just entirely dissolve in real time.
Think about how beauty, blood, and the supernatural are so tightly intertwined in this story. Stoker's vampires weren't just designed to give you a cheap jump scare in the dark. They acted more like a nightmare mask for the unspoken, deeply buried anxieties the Victorian era harbored about female sexuality. Women who were openly, assertively sexual, what scholars refer to as the monstrous feminine, were absolutely undeniably terrifying to the patriarchal order of the time. The vampires were just the perfect subversion of that natural order.
And before we get into the nitty-gritty of the characters, I just want to briefly highlight the incredible source material we're drawing from today. This whole literary analysis comes from LindaAnn LoSchiavo. She's a native New Yorker, an award-winning essayist, and a poet. And her expertise just effortlessly unpacks these super heavy Gothic themes, basically turning a century-old horror story into a stunning mirror of societal panic.
Section 1. Enter the New Woman, shattering the Victorian box.
Okay, to really understand the sheer panic in Dracula, you kind of have to understand the era itself. Victorian culture absolutely loved keeping women neatly packed away in a very specific little box. Pure, submissive, and entirely domestic. You know, the classic angel in the house ideal. But society was shifting. Enter the new woman, this ambitious, independent, and frankly inconveniently mobile female archetype. When she arrived on the scene, showing this disruptive desire for individual expression, those neat little Victorian boxes started splitting right at the seams.
Section 2. The Fault Line. Lucy Westenra versus Mina Harker. Stoker took this real-world societal panic and mapped it directly onto his characters. They basically act as the living, breathing embodiment of the era's conflicting expectations. On one side you have Lucy Westenra. She's magnetic, playful, she has honest appetites, but the novel fiercely, and I mean fiercely, punishes her for that desire. Then on the other side there's Mina Harker. She's composed, capable, and endlessly useful. The culture and the novel only allows Mina's competence because it's safely contained. She represents this idea of well-managed competence.
Lucy's storyline just perfectly illustrates this underlying tension. In the novel, she famously wonders aloud why a girl can't simply marry 3 men at once. Now, to us today, this reads less like a monstrous trait and way more like a woman who is just completely exhausted by her limited options in life. But Victorian society, they couldn't handle even a flicker of real appetite. So when her fiancé Arthur eventually drives a stake through her heart, it really isn't about killing a monster. It's about violently forcing Lucy back into the only shape Victorian society could tolerate, still, silent, and quote-unquote pure.
Meanwhile, Mina gets a completely different treatment. The famed vampire hunter Van Helsing gives her what he thinks is the absolute highest praise, saying she has a man's brain and a woman's heart. But think about that quote for a second. It's a total backhanded compliment. It essentially flatters Mina right into a cage. It just proves that female competence was only acceptable to these men when it was explicitly framed as borrowed masculinity, safely wrapped up in feminine devotion.
Section 3. When men become damsels, fragile masculinity.
Now let's flip the script for a minute here. Stoker deeply examines the men of the novel too, and he pretty much inverts every single expectation. Watch what happens when that famed Victorian stoicism just completely crumbles. Jonathan Harker arrives at Castle Dracula as the self-assured, rational professional, but instantly becomes a passive, trapped prisoner. He's literally the damsel in distress. And the men who team up to hunt the vampire? They act way less like a heroic brotherhood and much more like an anxious support group just absolutely drowning in guilt. It turns out male vulnerability becomes the true horror.
And the engine driving all of this masculine unraveling is the Count himself. Dracula absorbs all the era's deep-seated fears of foreign infiltration, what scholars call reverse colonization. He destabilizes these tightly controlled Victorian male identities just by existing. Every single encounter with him just chips away at their composure.
Which leads us to this really profound observation by scholar Christopher Kraft. He points out that the whole long middle section of the novel essentially consists of two opposing father figures, Dracula on one side and Van Helsing on the other. And what are they actually doing? They're projecting their own anxieties and fighting for control over female bodies, completely without the women's input. The real battlefield of the novel is literally the body of a sleeping woman. It's wild to think about.
Section 4. A fear of change. The enduring mirror.
So, the vampiric kiss in this story unsettles gender lines so thoroughly that the men's frantic efforts to cure the women, they're really just desperate attempts to restore a broken societal status quo. And this is exactly why the novel remains profoundly relevant today. It's a story that absolutely refuses to stay in the past. Every single generation invents its own monsters to cope with the fear of shifting social boundaries. We project our anxieties onto the monsters of our time.
When you get right down to it, the ultimate thematic takeaway here is that Dracula is a cautionary tale. It is the story of a society so deeply terrified of rapid, unstoppable change that it literally had to give that fear a face. Stoker's greatest trick was making us realize that the fangs and the blood, they were never the scariest part. The scariest part is a world that would rather stake its own people than let them change and evolve.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to ponder. Knowing what we know now about the Victorian era's massive gender panic, what monsters are we creating today to hide our fear of a changing world? I really want you to think about our own societal mirrors. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.